Hello, everyone. Welcome to the very first episode of the DevLake podcast, where we dive into everything software development related. So we're particularly excited about learning and exploring how to get better at writing, testing, and delivering software by leveraging AI and data-driven practices. I'm your host, Henry. Today, I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Emil. How are you doing, Emil?
Hey, Henry. I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here for our first episode.
Absolutely. It's a thrilling time for developers with so many advancements in AI and tech. And since this is our first episode, I want to talk a bit about what inspired us to start this podcast.
That sounds great, Henry. Why don't you go ahead and kick things off?
Sure. So for those who don't know me, I'm the creator of an open source engineering intelligence platform called Apache DevLake. We basically help engineering teams answer questions. So for example, a product person might wonder why a feature takes 6 weeks to develop and where the time goes. And developers might question, why certain PRs sit idle for a month without going to production. So to answer these questions, we collect data up and down the stack to surface insights and help identify opportunities to improve. And through building this project, we've had countless discussions with our open source community members, and that inspired us to create the space where we could share insights, discuss best practices, and then learn from each other.
Well, that's a fantastic background, Henry, and that's really kind of the essence of what we're aiming to do with this podcast. It's really to share and learn, right? So with that, let's bring on our guests, all right, for today's podcast, today's episode. So we're thrilled to have John Kline and Ingo from Riot Games joining us. So guys, we're excited to have you here. John and Ingo, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us. This is great. Really exciting.
Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. To start, John and Ingo, could you both share a bit about your professional journey and then what your current roles entail at Riot Games?
Sure. I'll start, I guess.
Mhm.
Sure. Let's see. I've been at Riot now for 14 years. Riot is a little bit over 15 years old, so I was fortunate enough to start just after season one. Before that, oh gosh, I spent some time in the Air Force, and then after that, left and did some odd jobs in electronics, fixing TVs, fun stuff like that. Before I jumped into being a professional developer. This is a long time ago. And since then, I've done various things, various consulting gigs and things like that before landing at Riot Games. And I'd never been involved in the game industry before. Um, and it was exciting, especially at first when it was just a startup. That was quite the journey, a lot of fun. And since then, mostly backend services, either directly contributing and writing them, or more recently in some sort of a leadership position. Um, Currently, I am the technical lead for the Commerce Initiative, which handles things like inventory, progression, missions, payments, that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
Ingo is on our team, and he's another technical lead. Go ahead, Ingo.
Yep. Yes, I'm Ingo. Great to be here. Yeah, like John mentioned, technical lead within that team that John just talked about. And yeah, for myself, I've been with Riot since 2018. But even in that time, so many things changed. We've actually launched a couple games since then, which was a really interesting journey. And I've been the whole time been on the like different parts of our platform, or what we call player platform team. And with those game launches, those teams were in like very high demand. Complexity went up, supporting many different games. But yeah, before Riot, worked on just lots of different types of distributed services type problems. And right before Riot, also worked kind of outside of those platform teams on games themselves. But definitely the most of the stuff that I'm working on is more similar to what John's describing, the platform type services in this commerce team. Yeah, that's it.
Fantastic. So we're gonna talk a bit about games for sure later. But first, I want to jump to the story of how we got connected. So it's been over a year since we connected through the DevLake community. So I was wondering what initially drew you to explore tools like DevLake, and how has the journey been since then?
Uh, well, uh, Yeah, it's interesting. For me, I think it started a few years ago when I stumbled across the Accelerate book, which led to a lot of the Dora um, metrics and discussion several years ago. Uh, so I started following, I read Accelerate. I started following some YouTubers like Dave Farley, read some books like Continuous Delivery, and I got pretty interested and invested in the basic approach to how you manage and track the velocity of software through your system. Um, we had been running into issues, and this is a common problem on development teams in general. How do you actually track how fast your software is progressing through your system? Very often we use metrics like story points and things like that, which are more planning tools, but they're not really effective at actually getting good visibility into the development process. And we were looking for ways, or I was looking for ways to improve how our teams worked. Anyway, it was a bit of an aha moment for me. I kind of went down a few rabbit holes on that. It really kind of clicked with me. It really, the whole idea of like how you can organize your rituals, processes, and tools to kind of measure what you're doing and be able to think about data as when it comes to understanding how your development team is working there was a lot of insight there.
Hey,
Um,
John, question for you. So I'm a big reader, avid reader myself. You mentioned the Accelerate book, so I'll definitely check that one out. But what were some of the other, just out of curiosity, what were some of the other CI/CD books that you read at the same time that kind of
uh,
generated the interest in
yeah,
this?
I mentioned Dave Farley. He has a book called Continuous Delivery that goes back a few years. The whole continuous delivery movement is really tied pretty closely to Dora, and that kind of goes back to like the if you're an older developer, uh, you remember the early aughts. You probably remember things like extreme programming and XP and the principles behind that, and that was a pretty hot topic back in the day. And a lot of those same core principles really kind of evolved into what we call continuous delivery today. They've been refined and evolved. So I was really kind of into the whole Agile XP thing back in the day on some projects, but it had kind of sort of fallen by the wayside. And so when I picked it back up again, it was really interesting.
Yeah. I remember reading if you've heard of the Phoenix Project, I remember reading that back in like 2012, 2013. So that's
The name
basically,
sounds familiar, but I've
yeah,
never read it.
it's a fable. It's about it's a theoretical company, and they're struggling to bring out new software faster. There's too many bugs, and then there's a conflict between the dev teams and the operational teams and the business. So it's kind of like a fable. That's like the story of
Oh,
DevOps.
yes,
Pretty
yes.
interesting.
Yeah, we did read
Yeah,
that. I
yeah.
have read that. Yeah.
But it's feel like everyone that I talk to that have read it, you can kind of relate to each of the characters in the story, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's an interesting one.
Yeah, for me, it's been a little bit different. I think I would describe it more as I ended it up landing on a similar approach, like what like the books that maybe John's talking about, or DevLake in particular, after like trying to figure out, oh my God, we have so many different services, so many different teams, and I didn't think we have a great handle, like no surprise, on where we're doing well, where do we need to do more work. Because of course, those are large teams. You have people coming and going. Like some people have a very high bar and might be more critical of their service. But when you compare it to other parts of the org, actually maybe their service and their development processes actually are really good already, and they probably should focus on something else. So I was just reflecting, like, how can we get better at this without micromanaging the team and without having all your technical leaders being hands-on all the time, because that's also hard to scale. So I saw myself starting to build basically my own custom tooling, just really trying to connect things like all the infrastructure definitions that we have. Okay, put them on one screen, right? Because the people that work on maybe a handful of services would never really step back and see, okay, what does the entire architecture look like? And then I tried to repeat that idea for Sonar type quality metrics and PagerDuty and like monitoring type metrics for our SLOs, right? So I started to see myself aggregating all those kind of data points myself. But then as I was doing that, yeah, I heard the work that John and others have been doing, and this evaluation, and just got super interested of using existing tooling basically. But that's how I kind of came in touch with that problem space. Yeah.
This is super interesting. And then I think one really interesting point that Ingo just mentioned is every team is unique, right? And they want to focus on different things, different areas for improvement. And then for a new engineering leader or a team who wants to get started with getting a better understanding of their practices, where they are, where they should focus on next, what are some, good places to start or some effective strategy or framework to think through this?
Well, I think for me, a real insight that I reached from reading the books and kind of studying this a little bit was kind of figuring out, to me, what for me was the core concept of what we're really trying to achieve here, which is essentially, it's pretty simple to express. It's how can you keep the main trunk of your development branch deliverable at all times, right? And that sounds pretty simple, but the insight for me and what I got out of the books and studying things like Dora was that you that can really be the center of a whole bunch of different practices and processes and tools that all drive you towards being able to achieve that goal, right? Very often, most software projects I work on or have worked on in the past, it's not really possible to deliver at any given moment from the main trunk, right? It's just there's some problem or there's not a lot of trust necessarily in that process. So being able to align everything around being able to release your software quickly kind of dictates what processes and tools you're going to use. So that means that you really need to use CI, small changes, main trunk development. You need to be able to have a development pipeline that has tons of quality gates so that that operates quickly so that you can be sure that your code is at the highest quality possible. But then you also need to measure it. That's where Dora really kicks in. Like, how effective are you actually being? Are you actually driving a change in an effective way quickly? And one of the other seemingly paradoxical things that comes out of continuous delivery is this idea that if you go faster, you actually improve reliability and quality. And so you can find those bottlenecks by looking at your metrics in your process and make evidence-based decisions using the data to adjust and tweak how you do things. And then if everything goes well, at the end of the day, you end up with higher productivity and reliability at the same time. So it's a pretty compelling argument.
Yeah. The only thing I would add is that the good news here is that none of this is crazy hard to do, or like none of it is rocket science, right? Like John said, like you actually end up when you start adopting maybe some of those initial new behaviors that John's talking about. Like we all know that that's the right way to do things anyway. But I think what is unique and what is maybe a good starting point is this discipline to use the same approach, whatever you come up with, use the same approach across all your different code bases, or ask the same question about your 15 different repositories or whatever, right? All the different microservices you operate. Once you start doing it, like treating them all the same and asking all the same questions, pulling all the same data, all of a sudden it becomes objective and quantifiable and things like that. And that's, even though it's such a simple idea and everybody can do it, all of a sudden it becomes so powerful what it allows you to do and how it takes the emotion out of some of those conversations, right? Because it's not at all about blaming team, like everybody's in a different, solving a different problem, but historically it's at least something we haven't done. We haven't necessarily asked exactly the same question about all the different services in one team operates. So a lot of it is about just agreeing on that structure and those key questions and behaviors, and then just applying it ruthlessly, right, across everything you do, and grow from there. Yeah.
Exactly. I think it's a lot about, like Ingo mentioned, establishing benchmark baselines, have more objective measurements, and then have people act on it, right? And then one thing I heard from John was super interesting is this concept of small changes, which I think is behind, the continuous delivery and also DORA framework. Because if you think about the 4 keys, it's really deployment frequency. You're trying to ship more frequently, and then so the changes are going to be smaller, have to be smaller. And then the change lead time, you're also trying getting that time shorter if you have smaller changes. So I think smaller changes really this key concept that behind many of the best practices. And that leads to my next question, because remember during one of our previous conversation, one of your colleagues, Steve, mentioned there's a new initiative at Riot last year to encourage smaller, more manageable pull requests. So, and then you guys were using DevLake, helping to drive and confirm these behavioral changes. So do you think you could share a bit more about that experience?
Yeah, Steven is he's one of our engineering managers on one of the teams in commerce, and he's been a strong advocate for a lot of the principles behind DORA and continuous delivery, and especially data-informed, evidence-based decision making for his team. And he's been a really great kind of partner through this whole process. He's been an early adopter of this stuff. And one of the things that he noticed, refer back to the story that he told, was he was using the DORA metrics to get a really good view at how the developers are actually using their tools in GitHub and things like that. So he's looking at PRs, PR size, how long was it taking for things to go through the system? And then he was aligning that back to their Jira boards and trying to understand how did that translate back to the ability for them to push their tasks through. And it seemed to be taking a little bit longer than he wanted. So he hypothesized that he could reduce the size of the tickets, which would in effect reduce the size and scope of the work that they were doing, smaller PRs, and then emphasize to the team that they should be breaking their work up into multiple PRs, small size, emphasize small changes so that you don't break the build. Like big merge changes are always the bane of fast productivity. So that was his hypothesis. Based off of the data he saw in DevLake, and then they made some changes, made everything smaller, and he could see, not only did it feel like the team was running faster, but he could actually see it in DORA, that things were coming through and they were actually increasing the number of story points that they're able to push through in certain sprints. So
were you guys able to quantify that at all? I mean, you could see the improvement, but were there tricks?
Yeah, he could definitely trace it back to, and that's to me what the real selling point is for a product like this, which is a lot of times is that you can make these hypotheses, run an experiment, and actually track the output, right? A lot of times the way the process can work, and this isn't a dig at Riot or any other organization, this is just the way it normally works in my experience with development teams, is if people want to make an improvement, so somebody comes up with an idea, and oftentimes it's the strongest personality in the room or the lead in the room whose idea gets implemented, but you don't necessarily have any way to track that back to really good operational metrics to determine did that actually improve things or not. And so that leads to a lot of ambiguity. Well, something like actually tracking these metrics, it sounds pretty simple when you say it out loud, but it's not always so simple. Actually gives you a much better visibility into what's actually happening, and so it can help. It's one tool. It's not a golden bullet, right? There's lots of things involved in getting software out, but it's definitely a way to improve visibility and reduce. Like Ingo made an allusion to, how do you make decisions, and sometimes it can be kind of very back and forth. This really helps reduce a lot of those conversations into puts them into a more useful context.
Hmm. And John, by any chance, do you remember some of the numbers, like before and after, in terms of PR size and then PR review time? What was it like before the initiative and after?
I don't know. I think I don't want to speak for Stephen too much, but I think it was PRs that might be open for days, trying to reduce it down to single day or day and a half kind of PRs. I mean, that was roughly the scope. I mean, we're looking at some PRs that could potentially that were fairly large and might be open for say up to a week or so.
And then
Um,
was that a pretty significant improvement for you guys? Did that fundamentally, you know, make it more efficient how you guys do business? Was that enough of a change for you guys?
it was a noticeable change for Steven's team in his ability to like improve the velocity of work going through the system for sure.
Yeah, I think people underestimate, like certainly when you talk to somebody who has never heard of this or hasn't looked at the dashboards, right, and how the numbers change as you maybe make tweaks in the team, it's maybe counterintuitive how strong of a signal the PR size I think is in practice. Like people immediately when I talk to people about this, you think, oh, okay, people will game the system and submit like only one line changes and things like that, right? People immediately try to like discount the idea, but in reality, like what I've seen is that it's this idea of keeping the changes small and reducing complexity is so much. It goes, of course, much beyond just the PR. It goes into how are you thinking about maybe your Jira tickets, and just in general how much you're thinking about rollout of changes. So I think it's encouraging. It's at the core of a lot of good behaviors we want to see. We want to always people to think about backwards compatibility, things like data migrations, feature flagging, all of those things you should be doing anyway. It's encouraging them. And also, I think when you throw time zones into the mix, we're a global company, the higher the chances are that you get still something approved before the end of your day, then you can work on it the next morning. As opposed to the reason some of those PR times were so much longer is we sometimes lost this window of opportunity at the end of your day in some time zone, and then you maybe lose the next day as well. So it's huge,
I'd be
and
fine
I
with
think
one-line PRs, by the way.
yeah. So it sounds like it's not a huge deal, but I think there's a lot connected to it, a lot of benefits that we're getting, and this is just one of the symptoms. I think the smaller PRs. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not an easy fit, right? Like there's so many
Mhm.
considerations going into this, like you mentioned, backward compatibility, migrations, and even the non-technical stuff, like just different time zones could lead to days of wait. So I just want to do another follow-up on this because I think this is super fascinating. So what were the measures that you guys took to get the PR review time like from several days down to like 1 day or 1.5? Like what are the things that like tools in the toolbox that people can use to get this done?
So a lot of these are just behavioral changes. So it starts at the beginning when you break out and sort of plan your work so that you're breaking out the work into smaller, more composable pieces. Um, then basically emphasizing with the developers that what we're looking for is to take that piece of work and break it out into multiple PRs. So what a lot of what the developers do is, risk avoidance, right? Because no one wants to push something that breaks, right? And so very often, if you're working on a feature, even a relatively small feature, that feature can span multiple areas of the code base, even if it's fairly small. And it may take you to go from 0 to 100% complete. It could take you a week. And then now you got a 600 line PR, right? And so now you're pushing that out and trying to get somebody to review it uh, which can take a while. It's a lot to take in. So to get a proper review, it's a lot. So you're breaking a couple of the rules there for CI, which is one, you got multiple sources of truth because you've got multiple active branches that are running. So merging is more difficult and everything is bigger. So one of the behavior changes that we try to emphasize for this is being able to be comfortable with pushing changes every day or close to every day, and then opening up another PR. So that requires feature flags and various other, branch by abstraction and other techniques that you can use to be able to push non-working code up and have confidence in your pipeline. And to be clear, we're not quite there yet everywhere. I mean, this is a journey, not a destination. But by essentially trying to change the behavior of the developers and getting them to trust the pipeline so that they trust being able to make small pushes and breaking that feature up into maybe 10 pull requests instead of one pull request is really critical to the successful adoption of things like CI. And Dora kind of helps validate that that's actually working and that we're actually maintaining our velocity and reliability.
And then John and Ingo, I know because we've been talking for a while before you set up DevLake, you guys also evaluated some other platforms and tools that are out there. And a lot of the ones out there really focus more on kind of the C level and provide kind of GUIs or dashboards on more of the developer specific productivity, let's say, right? It's based on individuals and teams. I know you guys mentioned that you preferred a different approach than that, right? More approach on the project approach. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit in your thinking around that?
Yeah, our very first approach was to we downloaded an open source GitHub scanner that just essentially scanned metadata, and we tried to build our own um, sort of basically DevLake on top of it ourselves, right? And we're this was a side quest, so we didn't necessarily have the time to spend on it. So that had limited use, but it kind of got us a little bit closer. No, yeah, we did evaluate a few other products. A couple of the other products that we looked at were really that we came into vendor evaluation on. We're really focused on both the developer and more or less providing reports to upper management, right? So the idea was managing at the project level and being able to measure velocity of individual developers on the team. So this was really not the approach that we wanted to take. Wanted to focus more on an engineering focus and look at the projects themselves, not the individual contributors to those projects, because generally speaking, that's just toxic. Like the idea of being able to evaluate the health of the project is an indicator of your processes and tools and the support for those individual contributors. It's almost never an individual contributor who's the problem, and that shouldn't be what we emphasize when it comes to this. So we did that evaluation, and then I was googling, and then we sort of stumbled across a fairly early version of DevLake, and we're like, oh, this looks cool, and it's free, so that's awesome. Yeah, we're kind of attracted to it, and then when I took a closer look at it, and particularly the Grafana dashboards and stuff, it was really project focused and repo focused. Of course, you could see the individual people because that's metadata, but the goal wasn't to push up to the C-suites. It was more about operationalizing and improving the ability to see what's going on with the project. And I really appreciated that. So.
And then John and Ingo, just from your perspective and kind of talking to your peers, maybe in the gaming industry or peers kind of across different industries, just in dev, do you think you guys are kind of unique in that as far as culturally your organization wanting to look at the project level versus the individual engineering level metrics, or you say that's kind of standard from a culture perspective, what you've seen talking to your peers in other industries or other companies, just out of curiosity?
Well, Riot's the only gaming company I've worked for, so and the culture at Riot is great. So it's just it's a very it's not really a place where you would see that kind of toxicity at all. Now, I don't really have any experience. Maybe Ingo has some insight that he could share outside of.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, short answer is I don't know. It's not something I used before Riot. Doesn't mean that you can't use it. It's definitely for me. I would go back to what I was talking about earlier. That especially for the technical leads, but I think also just the more senior engineers will ask eventually those types of questions, right? Like where are really maybe good engineering practices, and who should I talk to maybe learn from them or maybe adopt some of those practices, and or what kind of books, other resources can I familiarize myself with to just do better. And one reason why I think this approach that John is talking about works really well for us is, well, sometimes it's not the team's problem. The team is pushing really hard and is highly skilled, but the architecture of your platform is kind of leading to that bad behavior, right? And um, John was talking about being maybe adverse to taking risks. Well, like sometimes maybe the technical architecture the team came up with a long time ago is maybe forcing the team or encouraging the like certain behavior, like very few deployments to production. And so I think either way, you have to ask those questions we're talking about. I think DevLake and the approach we're talking about, I think, is a great way to do so. And like I said earlier, it takes the emotion out of a lot of those conversations. And just in our case, the culture we have, like John said, I think it's really conducive to frame the conversations that way. But I could see maybe in other situations when you're building maybe different types of tech, different approaches could work. It's just for us, we just want to pinpoint as much as possible, I think, where do we need to invest more, and who should different technical leads talk to, because they might see really, really healthy behavior and metrics elsewhere in the company, and we just want to connect people like that as well.
I think that's also really the philosophy of DevLake here. So we are mostly an opinionated platform where we want to be as flexible as possible, and people can implement all different kind of metrics, dashboards on the platform. But there's really one direction that we want to sort of deter people away from, which is like looking at really like individual metrics, like number of pull requests, like number of lines of code. And that's just really, in our opinion, not creating value, but creating more trouble. And then getting the emotions in, right? To Ingo's point of taking emotions out. So that's really what we are trying to focus on. Yeah. So there's one thing I want to circle back on, which John mentioned, which is how to get the PR size smaller, and then which is, really this behavioral change and also the mindset change of, being able to push smaller pull requests and being able to push non-working code into your main branch. So I think I want to touch on this, which is the problem decomposition, right? So this is sometimes the hardest part in programming. Sometimes it's more of an art than science. So besides the mindset changes, how do you help engineers, to think through this and then being able to decompose the problems in a better way, in a smaller, more manageable structure? Any insights on that?
That's a really good question. I'll give my perspective on it. I'm kind of curious how Ingo deals with this. So, kind of going back to the core principle here, which is what are we really trying to do, right? Why are we doing small PRs, right? It's not enough to just say do small PRs. We do small PRs, right? That's sort of like the opposite of what we're trying to get to. The goal is to allow the developers to understand what the underlying purpose is so that they can independently make the right decisions to drive the right outcomes that we're looking for. So they first have to understand the core principles of this. And really, the core principle is that we want to be able to ship from main, right? And small PRs is one of the things that you can do to make that possible because it limits the number of sources of truth, right? There's only really one source of truth, which is your main trunk. And so if you've got a bunch of long-lived branches, with a lot of code on them, you now have multiple sources of truth. It makes integration harder. It makes the code less reliable. It slows everything down. And so that should be driving you towards minimizing your changes as much as possible. And then but to get there, like you said, it's very difficult to actually, like, how do you get a developer who is terrified or anxious to take a feature and partially ship it? That seems completely paradoxical to a developer. Like, why would you possibly ship an unworking feature? Um, so introducing them to concepts like branch by abstraction, and feature flags, are a couple of different approaches that you can take, essentially, where you can build abstractions and have the partial implementation turned off in the full old implementation. So you can introduce abstractions in your code when you need at the areas where you need to make changes, and then make the changes gradually over time, and use feature flags to control access to it. That might require investing in how do you manage feature flags and explaining to people how do you do feature flags. So maybe you get a third-party product that can manage global feature flags, because those can get out of control pretty easily if you're not careful. So it's a lot of things. A lot of it is just educating and then providing the tools and process to make it easier for developers to make the choices that we want them to make. Ingo?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the quickest way for me to explain it is by comparing it to rubber ducking, right? So you're forcing this conversation, and maybe initially with maybe more people who struggle with this more, you do more hand holding, but you're basically letting it play out, right? Like, okay, if you did all the work for this feature just in one go, and you have, I don't know, this like 1,000-line change. You can talk about it from the perspective of the author of the change, like how do you know this is safe to go out, right? In our microservices architecture in the platform, where all the different games that run on different platforms have to be compatible with this change, the data that exists in our caches and our databases. We have to be able to be compatible with the different data formats that are out there and like other parts of the system. The system's talking to you. You can talk through all of those kinds of things when it comes to the rollout to people to show them how much easier it gets when they break it into smaller pieces. But I think also for other people who are maybe not the author of the change, who are more in a review capacity, of course it becomes way easier for them to really think through, is this safe and what's missing from this, right? It's a lot harder to do when the changes are larger. So yeah, I think rubber ducking is a good maybe summary to how I would describe it. It just makes it obvious, like the types of things you need to be thinking about anyway. And I think and for the larger PRs, we usually don't do that justice, right? We think it's going to be fine. With the smaller PRs, it becomes so much easier to really, really think through, is it actually backwards compatible? Like, is it actually going to can we actually roll it out in this way? And because even with the smaller PRs, of course, we'll still make mistakes, but it's a lot easier than for the on-call engineer to figure out, oh, it was exactly this change that was causing this regression. So that would be my mental model for it.
Fantastic. We'd love the opportunity to dive deeper into like rubber ducking and also feature flag in the future episode. And one more question before we wrap up is I feel like this won't be complete without talking about a little bit about the games. So you guys both have been in the game industry like close or over a decade now, and I know Ingo also previously worked at Electronic Arts. So I'm curious, do you guys like play games yourself? Like, what are your top 3 favorites?
Way too often. So I've been playing games forever. I go back to the original Gold Box D&D games. RPGs, open world are kind of my favorite. Recently, I've kind of migrated off PC into PlayStation 5 because it's just so much easier for my current way of doing things. I don't have to worry about the gaming PC thing. But yeah, so Switch, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, Love it. Almost every like huge title that comes out on PlayStation that's an open world RPG. I'm currently on my fourth playthrough on Baldur's Gate 3. I don't want to like too many hours to
Holy
count.
moly.
Love Dark Souls, Elden Ring, stuff like that. So yeah, I spend more way. I just don't even watch TV anymore. As I do from about 8 o'clock till whenever, pretty much almost every night. So for me, that's been true for too many years.
Wow. I guess
Yeah.
I'm way more picky, is my takeaway here. I do play games, but I have very few games that I play for a very long period of time. So like probably my main love story is with different real-time strategy games. So a huge fan of Age of Empires series, CNC, StarCraft. Just yeah, could keep playing the old and the new titles. They're all fairly old at this point, but it just doesn't die for me. And yeah, that's the main thing. Mhm.
You know, it's funny. I was in a shop the other day. I think it was like a used bookstore or something with the kids, and so I had a bunch of stuff there. They were selling the original Nintendo, so the original NES from like 1987. So they had that there. So I almost bought it. I think I'm gonna go back and pick that up, and also get like Mike Tyson's Punch Out while I'm at
Get a Commodore 64 while you're at it and play some
it.
Pokemon.
Yeah,
There you
right.
go.
And then also asking for all of friends and engineers who are looking to work in a gaming industry, do you have organized playing session of your games like during working hours?
So
Uh,
we do have
yes.
a tournament, an internal tournament, which is probably the main thing I would highlight that we call the Rumble. So now it's for all the games we have. The last one I took part in was the Valorant Rumble. So there are different tiers per region, and people get pretty competitive. Surprise,
Mhm.
surprise. But so it's definitely a thing.
Yeah, I mean, Riot's got some great games, and we have a lot of folks who love to play here. So we pretty regularly we arrange teams. We play something or another, one of the Riot games and stuff. It's good to remember why we're doing all this stuff. So it's effective, it's fun, and people enjoy it. So it's great.
Fantastic. All right, thank you, Joe and Ingo. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Yeah,
Thanks for
thank
having us. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks guys. It's been a pleasure, and especially that you guys are the inaugural guests. It's our first episode, so yeah, thanks for
Quite,
joining us. It's
quite
been
a
a blast.
privilege. Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
And that wraps up our first episode of DevLog. We hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover in future episodes, feel free to reach out to us. And don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more exciting discussions on software development. Until next time, happy coding!